So you think you know where your property line is, right? You've got the fence, the deed, but what if I told you it actually extends all the way down to the center of the earth? Or that your neighbor's crane swinging over your yard could technically be trespassing? Yeah, today we're digging into the invisible, and honestly kind of surprising, boundaries of what you really own. And this whole story really kicks off deep underground in Kentucky. There's this guy, L.P. Edwards, who back in 1925 finds this absolutely incredible cave on his land. I mean, he poured his heart and soul into developing it, turning it into a tourist attraction. And in his mind, his hard work meant it was his cave, his discovery, his to profit from. But, and here's the big but, what if that amazing cave didn't stop at his property line? That simple question on your screen right now, it sparked a huge legal battle that really makes you think about what ownership even means. Is it just the flat piece of ground we see, or is there more to it? Like, a lot more, going way, way deeper, and even higher? So let's dive into this cave of wonders and the vertical boundary below our feet. This whole mess turned into the landmark case of Edwards versus Sims. And look, this wasn't just some backyard argument over a fence. This was about something way bigger. Who gets to own a super valuable resource that you can't even see from the surface? Okay, so here's the setup. Edwards, he owns the land with the only entrance to this thing, the Great Onyx Cave. But his neighbor, a guy named Pali, he had this nagging feeling. He suspected that this massive cave system was actually snaking its way right under his own farm. So Lee sued. He wanted a survey, and if he was right, he wanted a piece of the action. So the judge in the case, his name was Sims, by the way, he ordered the survey. And you know what? Lee was absolutely right. A huge, money-making part of the Great Onyx Cave was, in fact, directly underneath his property. This discovery basically forced the court to make a really, really big decision. So how in the world does a court figure this out? Well, they reached way back in time to this ancient legal principle. Cujus est solum, aegis est usque ad coelum et ad inferos. In plain English, whoever owns the soil, it is theirs up to heaven and down to hell. The court essentially said, your property isn't just a flat square on a map. It's a 3D column. And the craziest part? This meant Lee owned the section of the cave under his land, even though he had zero way of actually getting into it. All right, so that case pretty much established ownership down to hell, which naturally leads to the next question. What about the other direction? How far up to the heavens do your property rights really go? For like centuries, the accepted idea was that you owned this infinite cone of airspace stretching forever into the sky. It was simple and it made sense back when the tallest thing around was a church steeple. But of course, technology had other plans. Yeah, exactly. Think about it. If you literally own the sky above your house forever, then isn't every single airplane that flies overhead trespassing? And what about that construction crane from the new building next door that keeps swinging over your garden? All of a sudden, this up to heaven idea starts to get really messy. And this is what forced the law to evolve. We had to move away from that old school absolute ownership idea to something much more practical, what we now call reasonable use. So today, the courts basically say you have the right to the airspace you can, reasonably use and occupy. That crane, yeah, that's an intrusion, but a jet flying at 30,000 feet, not so much. It's all about balancing your rights with public needs like air travel. Okay, so we've covered down deep into the earth and way up into the sky. Let's bring it back down to the surface and talk about the boundaries we're all a little more familiar with, the ones that run side to side. Now, in a lot of places, especially in North America, property lines are part of this massive, orderly grid system. Surveyors basically laid a giant checkerboard over the land. So your deed might say you own a piece of a certain section inside a certain township. It's all very logical, very neat and tidy. But then there's the other main method called meets and bounds, and this one is way more like a treasure map. Seriously, it starts at a landmark like an old oak tree or an iron pin, and then it gives you a series of directions and distances tracing the exact perimeter of the property all the way around until you get back to where you started. All right, we've gone down, up, and all around, but there's one last twist to all this. What happens when a regular object, something you own, gets attached to your property and legally becomes a part of it? This is where so many arguments happen when people buy and sell houses. You walk through, you fall in love with that gorgeous custom chandelier,
And then on moving day, you find a hole in the ceiling where it used to be. So, was it supposed to stay? The answer all comes down to whether that chandelier legally transformed from a personal item into a piece of the house itself.
So, to figure this out, the law has these two key terms. A chattel is just your stuff, your personal property that you can move around, like a chair. But a fixture is a chattel that's been attached to the property in a way that makes it part of the real estate. Think of something like a built-in oven.
So, how do you tell the difference? Well, courts use a handy two-part test. First, they look at how physically attached the thing is. Would you have to tear up the wall to get it out? But even more important is the second part. What was the purpose of attaching it? Was it put there to make the house better, or was it just for the better use of the item itself? That's the key.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because context changes everything. Check out these examples. A microwave just sitting on the counter, that's your personal chattel. But a microwave built right into the cabinetry, that's a fixture. It stays with the house. Same goes for a mobile home. If it's just up on blocks, it's often a chattel, but bolt it to a permanent foundation, and suddenly it's probably part of the real estate. It all comes down to that intention to make it a permanent addition.
So when you really think about it, from a hidden cave miles underground to the airspace high above, and even down to the dishwasher in your kitchen, property lines aren't just lines on a map. They're this powerful, complex set of ideas that define our world. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you look at your own home, where do its boundaries really end?